The text arrived on a Tuesday. I know it was a Tuesday because I had a client review that morning. 4 hours going through a fixed income reallocation with a pension fund administrator named Gerald Okonkwo who had strong opinions about duration risk and communicated them slowly and at length. I finished at 2:47 p.m. I walked back to my desk. I poured coffee that had been sitting since 11 a.m. and I sat down and I checked my phone. My brother Darren's name was on the screen. The text had come in at 2:31 p.m. while I was still in the meeting. It was 3 sentences. Dad's retirement dinner is mostly his professional circle. Partners, colleagues, people from the firm. Having family there who aren't part of that world could create awkward situations. I'm sure you understand. I read it once. Then I set my phone face down on the desk and looked at my monitor for a moment. The fixed income allocation spreadsheet was still open. Column headers. Numbers. The particular neutral geometry of a financial model, which does not have opinions about anything. I picked up my coffee. I drank it cold because I had forgotten it was cold. I set the mug down. I did not text Darren back. I did not call my father. I did not call my mother, who would have been sympathetic in a way that would have required me to manage her sympathy for longer than I had energy for on a Tuesday afternoon following 4 hours of duration risk discussion. I opened a different window on my monitor. I looked at an account number I had looked at many times before. A private wealth management account held at First Meridian Bank, the same institution my father had banked with for 22 years, the same institution where I had worked for the past 8, the same institution whose name appeared on the building I had just walked back through after Gerald Okonkwo finished his opinions about duration risk. I looked at the account balance for a moment. Then I picked up my desk phone and called our client transactions team. My name is Serena Marsh. I am 37 years old. I have been a senior portfolio manager at First Meridian Bank for 8 years. Before that I spent 3 years as an analyst at a fixed-income boutique in the financial district whose name you would not recognize unless you work in institutional asset management, which is the kind of firm it was. Small, precise, not interested in being recognized by anyone who did not already know what it did. I manage 11 institutional accounts. The aggregate value of assets under my management is approximately $340 million. I report to the head of private wealth, a man named Douglas Hart who has worked at First Meridian for 19 years and who describes my work in performance reviews as, and I am quoting directly, the kind of quiet precision that makes everyone around it look better than they are. I live alone in a 2-bedroom apartment on the 14th floor of a building 12 minutes from the office. The second bedroom contains a reading chair, 3 shelves of financial and economic texts, and a small jade plant I have kept alive for 6 years. Which is longer than any relationship I have maintained with a person outside of a professional context, and which I consider an achievement. My father is Bernard Marsh. He spent 31 years as a senior partner at a commercial litigation firm called Hargrove Weston. He is, by any reasonable measure, a successful man, careful, methodical, respected in his field, the kind of lawyer who wins by preparation rather than performance. He retired at 64 after a valedictory year in which his firm threw him a retirement dinner at the Rosewood Hotel with 150 guests. He did not invite me. To be precise, he did not explicitly uninvite me. What happened was that my brother Darren, who is 3 years older than me and who has always served as the family's logistics coordinator for situations my father finds uncomfortable to navigate directly, sent a text on a Tuesday afternoon suggesting that my presence might create awkward situations. This was not the first such message I had received from Darren on my father's behalf. There had been a 50th birthday dinner 6 years ago, at which Darren had called to say the venue was small and the guest list was tight. There had been a firm anniversary gala 4 years ago at which the same logic had applied. There had been a Christmas dinner 2 years ago at which my father had mentioned through Darren that he was keeping it to immediate family and partners this year, which was how I learned that Darren's girlfriend of 8 months had been classified as immediate family before I had. Each time I had accepted the information with the equanimity of a person who has learned that arguing with a logistics coordinator on behalf of someone who will not make the call themselves is a category of effort that produces no useful output. I said nothing. I went on working. I managed my 11 accounts and attended my client reviews and kept the jade plant alive and waited for nothing in particular. The Tuesday text was simply the most recent data point. The difference this time was the account number on my monitor. My parents divorced when I was 9. My father remarried when I was 16. His second wife was a woman named Carol who was a partner at a different firm and who had 2 sons from a previous marriage, both of whom my father treated with the warm, practical investment of a man who had decided that a blended family required active construction and had set about constructing one. He bought them things. He attended their events. He introduced them at firm functions with the ease of a man for whom their presence was not complicated. He loved me. I do not want to suggest he did not love me. He showed up to the things a father is supposed to show up to, graduations, a school play I was in at 14 that I would have preferred he not attend because I had a small role and a larger role would have been better, a college orientation at which he shook hands with my roommate's parents and said the right things. But there was a kind of ease he had with Darren and later with Carol's sons Marcus and Joel, that he did not have with me. I had, by the time I was in my mid-20s, developed a working theory about this. My father was most comfortable with people who were legible to him, people whose professional and social coordinates he could read and place and describe at a dinner table. Darren ran a commercial real estate brokerage. Marcus was a physician. Joel was in finance, which was the closest anyone in the family had come to understanding what I did, except that Joel was in corporate finance and I was in asset management, which are different disciplines in ways that my father had never found interesting enough to ask about. I was not legible to my father. Not because I was doing badly, but because the specific thing I was doing was not something he had a category for, and my father was not, at his core, a man who enjoyed operating without categories. I had tried in the early years to explain it to him. Asset management. Institutional portfolios. Duration risk. Fixed income allocation. He would nod in the way a person nods when they are waiting for the part of the explanation that connects to something they already understand, and that part never came, and eventually the nodding would slow and he would ask Darren something about commercial real estate, which was a language he spoke. I stopped explaining after the 4th year. I focused on the work. I built the client list. I grew the portfolio. I got promoted to senior manager at 34, which was 2 years ahead of the typical timeline at First Meridian, a fact that Douglas Hart mentioned in a firm-wide email and that I did not mention to my family because I had, by that point, established a clear operational boundary between the 2 domains of my life. My family knew I worked at a bank. They thought I processed things. Darren had once described me at a Christmas dinner as being in banking, with the same vague warmth he would have used to say someone was in retail. And my father had nodded and moved on to Marcus's recent surgical rotation, and I had eaten my dinner and said nothing. The account I called about on that Tuesday afternoon belonged to my father. I want to be precise about this because it is the part of the story people sometimes misunderstand. My father had held a private wealth management account at First Meridian for 22 years. The account had been opened when he made partner at Hargrove Weston and had grown steadily over 3 decades of careful, methodical saving by a careful, methodical man. The current balance as of the Tuesday afternoon in question was $6.4 million. I was not my father's portfolio manager. That would have been a conflict of interest and would have required disclosure under First Meridian's client management policies, and I am not a person who creates compliance issues. My father's account was managed by a colleague of mine named Patricia Soon, who had been at the firm for 12 years and who was, by any measure, excellent at her job. What I did manage was my own account. My personal investment portfolio held at First Meridian because it was where I worked and because the internal rates were favorable and because I had never had a reason to move it. The balance as of that Tuesday was $4.2 million. Built over 8 years of senior-level compensation and the kind of spending habits that develop when a person lives alone on the 14th floor and has no particular interest in luxury goods or expensive hobbies and considers a well-maintained jade plant sufficient evidence of domestic success. The transaction I scheduled was a full liquidation. $4.2 million. Complete withdrawal. Execution scheduled for 6:45 p.m. on the evening of my father's retirement dinner. I had one instruction for the transactions team. Standard protocol, all notifications to go to the account holder and the branch relationship manager simultaneously, per First Meridian policy for large balance movements. The account holder was me. The branch relationship manager for my tier of accounts was a man named Howard Ching, who had been at First Meridian for 14 years and who was, I knew from professional proximity, thorough, conscientious, and constitutionally unable to let a large balance movement proceed without a personal phone call to verify intent. Howard Ching was also, I knew from the firm's event calendar, attending my father's retirement dinner that evening in his capacity as First Meridian's senior relationship manager for the Hargrove Weston firm account. My father's firm had banked with First Meridian for 18 years. Howard managed that relationship personally. He had been invited to the dinner as a professional courtesy. I scheduled the transaction. I closed the window on my monitor. I picked up my phone and texted Darren back. No problem. Give Dad my best. Then I put my phone in my bag and went back to the fixed income allocation spreadsheet, because Gerald Okonkwo had follow-up questions due by end of day and Gerald Okonkwo was a client and Darren was not. I left the office at 5:58 p.m. The retirement dinner was at the Rosewood Hotel, which was 14 minutes from my apartment by car and which I had driven past several times without ever having been inside. The firm had booked the main ballroom, 150 guests, a seated dinner, remarks from the managing partners, the kind of event my father had spent 31 years attending for other people and was now finally the subject of himself. I did not go anywhere near the Rosewood Hotel that evening. I went home. I changed out of my work clothes. I put on the older gray sweater I kept for evenings when I was not going anywhere. I went to my kitchen and looked in the refrigerator and decided on pasta with the roasted tomatoes I had made on Sunday, which kept well and required minimal active attention. I put water on to boil. I fed the jade plant, which did not require feeding that day but which I checked on as a matter of habit when I came home, the way some people check on a pet. I set the table for one. At 6:45 p.m., while I was waiting for the water to come to a full boil, my phone lit up on the counter. First Meridian transaction confirmation. $4.2 million. Liquidation executed. Reference number. Standard language. I read it, confirmed it matched what I had requested and set the phone back down. The water boiled. I added the pasta. At 7:02 p.m. my phone rang. First Meridian main line. Not Howard's direct number, the main line, which meant it had been routed through the switchboard, which meant someone had pulled the account and called the number on file before Howard had a chance to call directly. I declined it. I stirred the pasta. At 7:09 p.m. it rang again. Same number. I declined it. At 7:15 p.m., Howard Cheng's direct line. I knew his number. I had worked 3 floors above him for 8 years. I set the phone face down on the counter and watched the pasta. At 7:21 p.m. Howard called again. I let it ring. At 7:23 p.m. a text from Howard's number. Serena, please call me when you get this. Urgent. I drained the pasta. I plated it. I added the roasted tomatoes, which had kept exactly as well as I had hoped. I carried the plate to the table and sat down. At 7:31 p.m., Howard called again. I declined it. At 7:38 p.m., my phone showed a call from a number I did not recognize. It had a hotel exchange prefix. I knew the Rosewoods Exchange because I had once arranged a client meeting there. I let it ring. It rang 6 times and went to voicemail. I did not check the voicemail. At 7:45 p.m., a text from my colleague Patricia Soon. Serena, are you okay? Howard is looking for you. He just left the Rosewood. I read this text. I set the phone down. I ate my dinner. At 7:52 p.m., Patricia again. He drove over. He's at the hotel. Something happened at your dad's dinner. Call me when you can. I finished my dinner. I washed my plate, my glass, my fork. I dried them and put them away because I do not leave dishes. At 8:03 p.m. my phone rang. A number I recognized as belonging to my father's colleague, a woman named Janet Park, who had been a senior associate at Hargrove Weston for 11 years and whom I had met at 2 firm events over the years in the context of being Bernard Marsh's daughter who worked at a bank. I had not spoken to Janet Park in approximately 3 years. I answered. He was laughing. She said, Serena, I don't know what you did, but Howard Cheng just walked into the ballroom and your father's face. Serena, I need you to know that your father's face. She could not finish the sentence. He was laughing too hard. I told her I was glad the dinner was going well. She said it was going very well in a way that suggested she meant something more specific than the general quality of the event. I thanked her for calling. I said good night. I hung up. I went to my reading chair. I opened the book I had been working through, A History of Monetary Policy in Post-War Economies, that I had been reading in 20-page increments and which was, at that particular moment, exactly what I wanted to be doing. I read for 40 minutes. At 8:47 p.m., the buzzer for my building's front entrance sounded. I did not move immediately. I set my book down with the spine up to hold my page, which I know is bad for books and which I do anyway when I am going to return to them quickly. I went to the intercom. My father's voice came through the speaker. He said my name. One word. The way a person says a name when they have been practicing saying it in the car for 14 minutes and have not entirely decided on the tone they want to use when they arrive. I buzzed him in. He came up in the elevator. I heard it open at the end of the hall. I heard his footsteps. My father walked with a particular rhythm, the deliberate pace of a man who had spent 31 years walking into rooms where precision of movement was a form of professional signal. And the rhythm was the same even now, at the end of an evening that had clearly not concluded the way he had planned. I had left the door open. He came in. He was still in his dinner suit, dark, well-cut, the kind of suit a man buys for the events he considers the significant markers of his professional life. His tie was loosened. He looked, I thought, like a man who had driven 14 minutes in a car with the particular quality of silence that follows a public event whose script has departed significantly from the prepared version. He stood in my entryway for a moment. I was in my gray sweater and the older trousers I had changed into after work. I was holding my book with my thumb in the page, which I was aware communicated something about the evening I had been having in contrast to the evening he had been having, and I did not put it down. "Sit down," I said. "I'll put coffee on." He sat at my kitchen table. I put the coffee on. I did not speak while it brewed. He did not speak either. He sat with both hands flat on the table and looked at them, and I stood at the counter and watched the coffee maker, and the apartment was quiet in the way it is always quiet on the 14th floor at this hour. No traffic, no voices, just the coffee maker and the faint sound of something settling in the building's infrastructure. I set a mug in front of him. I sat down across from him. He wrapped both hands around the mug. "Howard Ching," he said, "walked into the ballroom at 7:45. "I know," I said. "In front of..." He stopped. "There were 150 people there, Serena. Partners. Judges. People I have worked with for 30 years. "I know," I said. He looked up. He said, he stopped again. He was a precise man, my father, a litigator by training, and he was having difficulty with the sentence, which told me something about the gap between what he had expected the evening to contain and what it had actually contained. He said, my father continued more carefully, that First Meridian had a situation with one of our high-value accounts. That a senior portfolio manager had executed a full liquidation of a $4.2 million personal portfolio that evening. That the manager had not been reachable by phone. That he said he needed to locate her. To confirm intent. He paused. And then Daniel Reeves, you know Daniel Reeves, he's been my managing partner for 11 years. Daniel said, "Which manager?" And Howard said your name. The coffee maker finished. The apartment was quiet. Daniel Reeves, my father said, looked at me and said, "Bernard, is that your daughter?" The senior portfolio manager at First Meridian. And He stopped. I waited. "I didn't know," he said. "I didn't know what you did. I knew you worked at the bank. I thought you were. I didn't know you were a senior portfolio manager. I didn't know you managed $340 million. I didn't know that Howard Ching knew your name." "You never asked," I said. The words came out the same way they always came out when I said them. Not as an accusation, not as a wound, but as a fact. The simplest available description of what had happened over the past 8 years. "You never asked." A subject, a verb, a pronoun. Factual. Complete. My father looked at his coffee. "Darren said." "Darren sent the text," I said. "But you knew about it. You could have called." He did not deny it. There was a quality to his silence that I had not encountered before in 37 years of being his daughter. It was not the silence of a man who disagreed. It was not the silence of a man who was preparing a counterargument. It was the silence of a man who had arrived at a moment where the only accurate response was to be quiet, and who was, with some difficulty, being quiet. My father was a litigator. Quiet did not come easily. "Daniel Reeves," he said after a long moment, "told me you were one of the best portfolio managers at First Meridian. He said Douglas Hart had mentioned your name at a banking sector luncheon last year. He said," he paused. "He said he was surprised I hadn't mentioned you." I did not say anything. "He was surprised," my father said, "that I hadn't mentioned you." He said it a second time, quietly, as though the repetition was helping him understand something about the sentence that he had not fully understood the first time. I reached for my coffee. I drank it. I set the mug down. What do you want me to say? I said. I don't know, he said. And then more slowly, I don't know what I came here to say either. I got in the car. I drove here. I know, I said. You buzzed from the front. Something shifted in his face. Not quite a smile. The precursor to one. The reluctant recognition that the situation contained an absurdity he was not yet ready to find funny but could see was there. The money, he said. I'll reinvest it tomorrow, I said. It was a same-day transaction. The position was liquid. There's no material impact. He looked at me. You did it on purpose, he said. I scheduled a transaction, I said. Howard Cheng's attendance at your dinner was a function of his role as relationship manager for the Hargrove Weston account. I knew he would be there because it was on the firm's event calendar. I knew he would follow protocol because Howard Cheng has followed First Meridian protocol for 14 years without exception. I scheduled a transaction that triggered that protocol. My father was quiet. That's a very precise answer, he said. I work in asset management, I said. Precision is the job. He looked at his coffee again. Outside, somewhere below on the street, a car passed. The building settled. The jade plant on the shelf by the window sat in the dark in its pot and was, as far as I could tell, fine. 8 years, my father said. 8 years, I said. And I never. No, I said. You never. He was quiet for a long time after that. I let him be quiet. I had spent 8 years not speaking in rooms where my father was present, and I was comfortable with the architecture of silence in a way he was not, and I was not going to rescue him from it now. It was his silence to sit in. He had built it. It was only fair that he should spend some time in it before I helped him find the door. He stayed for an hour and 20 minutes. We talked, carefully, the way two people talk when they are both aware that they are navigating something that has more structural integrity than either of them fully understands yet, and that applying too much pressure in the wrong place will damage it. He asked about the work. Not the vague asking of a man going through a social motion, but the specific asking of a man who has recently discovered that he does not know what his daughter does and is now, with some urgency, trying to find out. I explained fixed income allocation. I explained duration risk. I explained what a portfolio manager actually does, in concrete terms, at the level of detail I would use with a client who was new to the asset class and needed the foundation before the specifics. My father listened the way he listened in depositions, actively, with the particular focus of a man who understands that he is receiving information he will need to use later and cannot afford to misplace. He asked 3 questions. Each one was better than the one before it. By the third question I could see him beginning to build a category. The specific mental architecture of a person who has been handed a concept and is working out where to put it so it will be retrievable. It was the most focused attention he had given me in 37 years. I noted this specifically, the way I note things that have numerical significance. When he stood to leave, he did not have the loosened, reduced quality he had brought through the door. He still looked like a man whose retirement dinner had not concluded on the expected script. But there was something else in his face now. Something I did not have an immediate word for and which I decided, on reflection, was closest to the expression a person wears when they have just recalibrated a model they have been using incorrectly for a long time and are beginning to understand the full scope of what the recalibration requires. At the door he turned. The reinvestment tomorrow, he said. Which instruments? I told him. 2 fixed income positions, 1 equity allocation, duration balanced for the current rate environment. He nodded. The nod of a man who did not fully understand the specifics but was going to look them up later. Good night, Serena, he said. Good night, Dad, I said. I closed the door. I stood in my entryway for a moment. Then I went back to my reading chair and picked up the book and found my page and continued with the history of monetary policy in post-war economies, which had been waiting patiently and which, unlike the evening's other events, proceeded exactly as expected. Howard Cheng sent me an email the following morning at 8:12 a.m. The subject line was, Yesterday's transaction follow-up. The body of the email was 3 sentences. The first sentence confirmed that the reinvestment had been processed per my instructions and the portfolio was fully redeployed. The second sentence noted that the transaction had created some disruption at an event he had attended the prior evening and asked if I had been aware of this. The third sentence said that he hoped everything was all right and that I knew his door was open if I needed anything. I replied in 2 sentences. Everything is fine, Howard. Thank you for following protocol. I closed the email. I opened the fixed income allocation spreadsheet. Gerald Okonkwo had sent his follow-up questions at 7:54 a.m. and they were, as expected, numerous and specific and would require most of the morning to address properly. I addressed them properly. At 11:30 a.m. Douglas Hart stopped by my desk. Douglas was not a man who stopped by desks without purpose. He communicated by email and scheduled meetings and had a clear operational preference for structured interaction over corridor conversation. He stopped at the edge of my desk and looked at me for a moment with the expression he used when he was about to say something he had thought about in advance. He said, "Bernard Marsh called me this morning." I said, "I see." He said, he wanted to know if First Meridian had a policy on employees holding personal accounts at the firm. I said, "We do. It's in the employee handbook. Section 4. Douglas looked at me for another moment. He also, Douglas said, asked me to describe your role here in some detail. I described it. Thank you, I said. He asked if you were good at it. What did you tell him? Douglas said, I told him you were the kind of portfolio manager other portfolio managers hope to become. I looked at my monitor. He seemed, Douglas said, to find that useful. He went back to his office. I went back to Gerald Okonkwo's follow-up questions. The morning continued in the way mornings continue when the significant things have already happened and what remains is the work, which is always there, which does not recede simply because other things have been resolved. My father called on Sunday. He had never called on Sundays before. Sundays were for the people in his immediate operational life. Carol, Darren, Marcus, Joel. I was in a different category, a category he visited on holidays and formal occasions and which did not, in the prior operational model, require maintenance contact on a Sunday morning. He called at 10:15 a.m. I was in my reading chair with coffee and the monetary policy book which I was nearly finished with. I answered. He said, I looked up duration risk last night. I said, what did you think? He said, I think it's more interesting than I expected. I have some questions. I said, all right. We talked for 40 minutes. His questions were the questions of a man who had gone home and done the reading and come back with the specific confusions of someone who is genuinely trying to understand rather than someone performing the act of asking. The difference is detectable. I have spent 8 years with clients and I know the difference. I answered his questions. He asked follow-up questions. The conversation had the quality of a client meeting in the early stage. Foundational, careful, the slow construction of shared vocabulary that makes later conversations possible. Before he hung up he said, I mentioned to Daniel Reeves that you were my daughter. I said, I know. He emailed me. There was a pause. He said he's been trying to schedule a lunch with you for 2 years, my father said. He said your assistant keeps telling him your calendar is full. My calendar is often full, I said. Another pause. Serena, my father said. I'll have my assistant schedule it, I said. Next month. He said, thank you. I said, you're welcome. I closed the book when we hung up. I held it in my lap for a moment without opening it. Outside, the city was doing what cities do on Sunday mornings. Slow, unhurried, the particular quality of weekend light on buildings that have been there long enough not to need the week to tell them what they are. Some things take a long time to become visible. Not because they are hidden exactly, but because the people who need to see them have been looking in a particular direction for so long that it has become the only direction they know how to look. My father looked at me for 37 years and saw a version of his daughter assembled from assumptions he had never thought to test, because the assumptions were comfortable and the testing would have required him to admit he had stopped paying attention at some point without noticing he had done it. I do not think he is a bad man. I have thought carefully about this with the same precision I bring to fixed income analysis, and my conclusion is that he is a man who loved his daughter in the way he knew how to love, which was a way that did not include asking questions, and that this limitation is real and has cost both of us something, but that it is not the same thing as not loving her. The $4.2 million went back into the market the following morning. Duration balanced. Rate environment considered. The portfolio closed the week up 0.3%, which is not remarkable but is correct, and correct is what I am paid to produce. Howard Ching has not mentioned the transaction again. He followed protocol. That is all he did and all he needed to do, and I have always respected people who understand what their role requires and perform it without embellishment. My father calls on Sundays now. Not every Sunday. Most of them. He is learning the vocabulary. Fully. With the focused attention of a man who has understood that there is a language he does not speak and that not speaking it has cost him something he would like to recover. He asks questions that improve each week. Last Sunday he asked about the relationship between interest rate movements and bond duration in a way that suggested he had read something during the week and was connecting it to something I had said the week before. I told him he was right. He was. Darren has not texted since the retirement dinner. I do not know what my father said to him. I have not asked. It is not information I need. That is my story. I am Serena Marsh. I am 37 years old. I spent 8 years being the version of myself that my family had filed under works at a bank. A category small enough to exclude from the professional dinners, simple enough not to require maintenance, easy enough to send a text to on a Tuesday afternoon suggesting she might make things awkward. I scheduled a transaction. Howard Ching followed protocol. My father drove 14 minutes and buzzed my building and came upstairs and sat at my kitchen table and learned for the first time what his daughter actually does. He is still learning. I am still teaching. The vocabulary is building word by word, week by week in Sunday morning phone calls that last 40 minutes and contain better questions each time. If you have ever been the one they filed in the wrong category, if you have ever watched a parent look at you across a dinner table and see something smaller than what you are, I want to ask you something. Did you ever consider that the most precise intervention is sometimes the quietest one? That the right transaction executed at the right moment says everything that 8 years of explanation could not? Because sometimes the work speaks for itself. You just have to schedule it at the right time. Like, share and follow The Last Laugh for more stories about the moment the room finally catches up.